What if the very first spark of faith did not come from gods, temples, or sacred texts, but from a moment of raw human fear millions of years ago? Imagine an early human, standing under a sky so vast and unforgiving that every sound, every shadow, every flicker of fire seemed like a message from something greater. Before organized religion, before any concept of divine worship, there was only instinct, curiosity, and an overwhelming sense that the world was filled with forces beyond human control. And it is in this fragile space between survival and imagination that the earliest form of spirituality may have emerged. Think about the intensity of that world for a moment. A place where thunder was not just noise, but a presence, where the darkness stretched endlessly without explanation, where the death of a companion forced the group to confront a mystery they could not escape. These early humans did not have language sophisticated enough to define belief, yet their reactions hint at something deeper. They gathered together in silence around flickering flames, watched the night as if waiting for meaning to reveal itself, and responded emotionally to events they could not fully understand. These subtle behaviors form the foundation of what we might call the first ritual circle, a raw and instinctive attempt to connect with something unseen but deeply felt. If you pay attention, you can almost sense the weight of those ancient moments, the invisible tension that pushed our ancestors to search for patterns in the chaos around them. The very idea of spirituality may have begun not as a structured system, but as a human attempt to interpret fear, awe, and wonder. And when you look at it this way, the origins of faith become far more complex and far more human than most people realize. Does this idea resonate with you? Have you ever felt that pressure to make sense of something bigger than yourself, even for just a second? What you are about to explore might change the way you understand the roots of belief itself. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments what this first spark of spirituality makes you think about, because your perspective adds new layers to this journey. And while you're here, check if you're already subscribed, leave your like to support the content, and share your thoughts so we can build this exploration together. Now, as we follow the steps of those first humans, something even more intriguing begins to appear, leading us into the next part of this story. As those early humans stood before the mysteries of their world, something unexpected began to take shape in their behavior. It did not start with grand ceremonies or intentional rituals. Instead, it emerged from simple, instinctive actions driven by emotion and fear. When lightning struck a distant tree, some would freeze, others would gather together as if proximity offered protection. When a predator's roar echoed across the plains, they did not just run. They paused, listened, and reacted with an awareness that suggested more than survival instinct. These reactions hint at the earliest form of ritual behavior, rooted not in belief systems, but in a shared desire to interpret what they could not see. Picture a small group huddled around a fire they barely understood, watching sparks rise into the darkness. They had no concept of symbolism, yet their repeated gathering around flames formed a pattern. Over time, these gatherings became moments of collective tension and anticipation. Firelight created shifting shadows that danced on cave walls, shadows that the mind could easily interpret as shapes of meaning. This fragile psychological state, somewhere between fear and fascination, pushed them toward the invisible. They began to sense that their world contained forces they could feel but not grasp. These primitive behaviors were not orchestrated. No leader told them to stand still, whisper, or touch the earth before a hunt. Yet these actions repeated, solidifying into something that resembled intention. A hand pressed onto a chest after a frightening noise, a gesture toward the sky after witnessing a natural spectacle, or the silent examination of a fallen companion all hinted at an emerging pattern of reverence. It was as if the mind was gradually shaping a framework to interpret mystery, and this framework formed the earliest roots of spiritual thought long before language allowed them to express it. The search for meaning was not rational. It was deeply emotional, born from a world where danger and wonder existed side by side. These repeated instinctive actions, subtle yet powerful, marked the beginning of humanity's attempt to communicate with the unseen. Even without words, their behavior revealed a growing curiosity about what existed beyond their immediate senses. As these instinctive rituals evolved, the boundary between physical experience and imagined significance became increasingly blurred, leading our ancestors into an even deeper exploration of the invisible forces that surrounded them. As early humans continued to navigate their harsh and unpredictable world, One experience stood above all others in shaping their emerging spiritual awareness: death. Nothing confronted them more directly with the unknown. The moment a member of the group stopped breathing, stopped responding, stopped moving, the entire community faced a question they had no language to articulate, yet felt deeply. What happens to someone when life leaves the body? This was not just a practical concern about safety or decay. It stirred an emotional and psychological reaction that suggested a dawning sense of something beyond physical existence. Imagine the silence that fell over a group when they discovered a fallen companion. Their reactions were not merely instinctive responses to loss. They lingered, touched the body gently, observed its stillness, and sensed that something essential was missing. This absence pushed their minds to explore possibilities they could not express. The body was present, but the presence they recognized as the individual was gone. That contrast alone sparked the earliest reflections on continuity, a primitive wonder about whether some part of a person might persist after death. Over time, their behavior around the dead changed. Instead of abandoning bodies to the environment, some groups began placing them carefully in specific positions or locations, almost as if preparing them for a journey. They covered them with leaves, stones, or pigments, repeating these actions across generations. Such gestures were not yet rituals in a structured sense, but they revealed a growing belief that death did not represent an absolute end. These early burials reflect a turning point in human cognition, showing a recognition of identity separate from the physical form. The emotional weight of losing a member of the group also strengthened social bonds, deepening their collective consciousness. Mourning, even in its earliest form, unified them through shared vulnerability. Their reactions signaled more than sorrow. They suggested an intuitive grasp of continuity, the silent beginning of a belief that existence might extend beyond the visible world. Each death pushed them to confront the same unanswered question, reinforcing the idea that life was connected to something larger, something unseen. As these practices slowly evolved, they created a foundation for a new layer of meaning in human experience. The mystery surrounding death became a catalyst for spiritual imagination, and through this imagination, early humans began shaping the beliefs that would influence every generation to come. And with each passing moment, their attempts to make sense of loss led them deeper into the emerging landscape of symbolic thought, drawing them toward even more profound expressions of early spirituality. As early humans gathered around the fire, something remarkable began to happen. The flames did more than provide warmth or protection. They created a setting that transformed the minds of those who watched. Firelight cast moving shadows on cave walls, distorting shapes into figures that seemed alive. These shifting patterns invited interpretation long before humans had the language to describe what they saw. In this dim glow, fear and imagination merged into a single experience, forming the earliest symbolic expressions of meaning. The circle around the fire became a natural stage for the birth of collective spirituality. Picture them sitting close together, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. The fire created a boundary, a defined space where the world felt temporarily controlled. Inside that circle, they were safe, aware of one another, aware of their shared vulnerability. Outside the circle lay the unknown darkness, filled with predators, storms, and mysteries they could barely comprehend. This contrast between light and shadow shaped their perception of spiritual power. Fire seemed alive, unpredictable, capable of transforming ordinary objects into symbols of something intangible. Gradually, the ritual circle became more than a gathering point. It evolved into a place where early humans experimented with gestures, sounds, and markings. Some traced simple shapes in ash or dirt. Others repeated motions around the flames, perhaps without knowing why. These actions were not yet rituals in the organized sense, but they carried emotional intensity. A repeated gesture could become a symbol could become a meaning, and meaning could become belief. As cognitive abilities expanded, these small expressions deepened into a shared understanding that certain spaces, actions, and moments held special significance. Fire also influenced early storytelling before stories had words. A raised hand casting a shadow that stretched across the wall could suggest the presence of a spirit or an ancestor. A sudden burst of flame might be interpreted as a sign or response. In these moments, early humans were not inventing religion. They were learning to perceive layers of reality. They were beginning to believe that the world contained messages, that the invisible could speak through light, sound, and pattern. This subtle shift was enough to ignite an entirely new dimension of human experience. As these early symbolic behaviors took root, the ritual circle became a space that united community, imagination, and meaning in a way that no natural setting had done before. And each night around the fire pushed human consciousness further, shaping the path toward the complex spiritual systems that would one day emerge. Before we continue expanding this journey, tell me in the comments what you think these early symbolic gestures reveal about the beginnings of human spirituality, because your interpretation adds a new layer to this exploration. Now, as these patterns deepen, something even more transformative begins to unfold in the way early humans understood the forces of nature. As the ritual circle around the fire shaped early symbolic thought, the world beyond that circle began to take on new significance. Nature was no longer seen only as a source of danger or survival, but as a powerful force that appeared to move with intention. The wind that swept across the plains, the storms that rolled over the horizon, the shifting colors of the sky at dawn and dusk all suggested a presence far greater than anything within the small reach of human control. For early humans, nature became the first entity to inspire reverence, shaping the foundations of what would eventually evolve into the earliest spiritual systems. Picture a group watching a storm approach from a distance. The sky darkened, the air changed, and thunder echoed across the land with a force that seemed to speak directly to them. They had no concept of meteorology, no scientific framework to explain what they witnessed, but they did not need one for their minds to search for meaning. The natural world acted with a scale and power that dwarfed their understanding. This imbalance created a sense of awe, a feeling that nature itself might hold awareness or intention. Over time, certain natural elements began to stand out as extraordinary. Mountains towered like guardians, lakes reflected the sky with unsettling stillness, and certain trees or rock formations seemed to anchor the landscape with an almost sacred presence. When early humans returned to these places repeatedly, they formed emotional attachments that deepened into symbolic significance. A particularly large tree could represent endurance, a river might symbolize life, and a cave may have been seen as a boundary between worlds. These interpretations emerged long before structured myths, yet they shaped how early humans navigated their environment. The recurring cycles of nature also contributed to this shift. The rising and setting of the sun, the phases of the moon, seasonal changes in temperature and vegetation all created predictable patterns that early humans depended on. Recognizing these patterns allowed them to anticipate the future, linking survival with observation. The more they observed, the more they sensed that these cycles carried messages or meaning. This eventually seeded the notion that nature functioned under unseen laws that influenced human life. Nature was vast, consistent, and unavoidable. It surrounded them, sustained them, frightened them, and inspired them. Because of this, the earliest sense of divinity was not a figure or a being, but the world itself. To early humans, nature was the first expression of something greater, something beyond physical form, something that demanded respect. And as they continued responding to its power, a deeper spiritual framework began to take hold, guiding their perception toward an even more intricate understanding of the unseen forces shaping their existence. As early humans continued to interpret the power of nature, their minds were evolving in ways that would fundamentally reshape their relationship with the unseen. Cognitive development did not occur all at once. It unfolded gradually, generation after generation, altering how humans perceived patterns, imagined possibilities, and formed connections between events. This slow but profound transformation allowed them to move beyond instinctive reactions and begin constructing mental frameworks capable of supporting spirituality. Their growing ability to think symbolically, remember past experiences, and project into the future opened a new dimension of awareness that made belief in the transcendent not only possible, but almost inevitable. Imagine the moment when early humans first recognized that a cause could lead to an effect that was not immediately visible. A rustling in the grass might signal a predator they could not yet see. The discovery of tracks in the dirt might reveal that another creature had passed hours earlier. These realizations formed the basis of abstract thinking, allowing humans to infer meaning beyond what their senses directly detected. Once the mind could interpret the invisible in a practical context, it became easier to apply the same cognitive tools to spiritual ideas. Memory enhanced this process. As humans began storing and recalling experiences more efficiently, they could compare past events with the present. They remembered storms, droughts, successful hunts, and tragic losses. Each memory deepened their sense that the world operated through underlying forces. Over time, these memories blended with imagination, which expanded their mental landscape even further. With imagination, early humans could visualize events that had not happened, scenarios that existed only in their minds. This mental capacity became essential for envisioning spirits, forces, or beings. Beyond the material world, language, even in its simplest form, accelerated this evolution. Though early communication lacked the complexity of modern speech, the ability to share ideas allowed beliefs to spread and strengthen. A gesture, a sound, or a repeated expression could carry symbolic meaning understood by the group. These early forms of shared representation created the first hints of collective belief, where individuals aligned their interpretations of the world through communication. Once ideas could be shared, they could also evolve, shaping more elaborate concepts of the transcendent. As cognitive abilities grew, so did humans' capacity to assign intention to natural forces. A sudden wind gust could be interpreted as a reaction, not merely a coincidence. A persistent drought might feel like punishment rather than a random event. This attribution of agency emerged naturally from a mind designed to detect patterns and motivations in the world. And with greater cognitive complexity, these interpretations became richer, deeper, and more emotionally charged. Through this gradual evolution, the human mind transformed into a vessel capable of perceiving a world layered with spiritual significance. And as imagination intertwined with memory, emotion, and symbolic reasoning, it set the stage for something even more powerful: the creation of stories that tried to explain the mysteries shaping their existence. As human cognition expanded, something remarkable began to take shape within early communities: the emergence of stories. These were not stories in the sense we know today, with structured plots or defined characters, but simple verbal attempts to make sense of the world. When individuals shared their interpretations of storms, animal behavior, dreams, or death, those explanations slowly transformed into narrative patterns. These early proto-myths became a powerful tool, giving shape to the invisible forces they sensed but could not fully understand. And because humans were now capable of symbolic thought, emotion, and imagination, these stories resonated deeply within the group. Imagine a night around the fire when one member of the group reenacted the moment a lightning bolt struck a distant tree. The gesture, the sound imitated with the voice, the pointing toward the sky all contributed to a shared understanding that something beyond human control had acted with power. Another member might add a detail, recalling a dream or another storm from the past. Over time, these fragments of experience blended, growing into a narrative that explained why lightning struck or why certain places seemed imbued with presence. These stories did not require belief. They emerged naturally from the human desire to connect meaning with experience. Dreams played a significant role in shaping these early narratives. Without a scientific concept of sleep, early humans viewed dreams as direct encounters with another realm. A dream about a lost companion could be interpreted as a visit, a message, or a continuation of their existence. These dream experiences fueled stories that blurred the line between the physical world and imagined worlds. For a species learning to perceive deeper patterns, dreams became bridges to a dimension they could not see while awake, encouraging further storytelling that expanded their sense of reality. As these narratives spread within the group, they created a new kind of social connection. Shared explanations reinforced unity and reduced fear by giving structure to uncertainty. A dangerous event could be retold with layers of symbolic meaning, transforming chaos into coherence. Over generations, repeated stories gained authority simply because they endured. This endurance planted the seeds for myth-making long before the first organized religions took form. These early myths were not merely entertainment, they were tools for survival, teaching the young, strengthening bonds, and turning mystery into a shared experience. And as these stories deepened, they subtly prepared the human mind for something much more structured and influential in the future. Let's continue. Write in the comments what these early myths make you reflect on, or which part of this ancient storytelling process you find most intriguing. Your perspective helps expand this journey of exploring how humans first tried to give meaning to the invisible. Now, as these narratives continue to evolve, they begin shaping the social world of early humans in profound ways. As oral stories began circulating within early human groups, their influence extended beyond individual imagination and started shaping collective behavior. Spiritual ideas, even in their earliest forms, played a significant role in how these communities organized themselves, made decisions, and interpreted their place in the world. Among small nomadic groups, survival depended heavily on cooperation, and any belief or narrative that strengthened unity became deeply valuable. Spirituality emerged not only as a way to explain the unknown, but as a social tool that held groups together in an environment where isolation often meant death. Consider how a shared interpretation of a natural event could align the group's actions. If a storm was understood as a sign of danger or transition, the group might migrate or change their hunting strategy. A successful hunt might be attributed to the favor of unseen forces, reinforcing confidence and encouraging repetition of certain behaviors that had seemingly pleased those forces. Over time, these associations structured group decisions, giving coherence to actions that might otherwise appear arbitrary. Belief added a sense of order, reducing uncertainty in a world that offered little stability. Roles also began emerging within these early communities. Certain individuals with stronger observational skills, vivid dreams, or an ability to interpret patterns were seen as more attuned to these unseen forces. They were not yet shamans in the full sense of the word, but their perceived connection to invisible realms granted them influence. When they described a dream, performed a gesture, or advised caution, the group often listened. These early leaders shaped spiritual understanding, not through authority, but through the group's shared belief that some people could perceive more than others. As these ideas spread, spiritual practices helped reinforce identity within each clan. Specific gestures, markings, or interpretations became unique to particular groups. These differences created subtle boundaries between communities, giving each its own sense of belonging. Spirituality, therefore, did more than address existential questions. It provided the first form of cultural distinction. Clans that migrated to new regions carried their stories, symbols, and practices with them, planting the seeds of diversity that would later define broader spirituals. Traditions. Perhaps most importantly, spirituality offered emotional resilience. In times of loss, scarcity, or danger, the belief in unseen forces provided structure to grief and fear. It helped individuals process trauma and uncertainty by framing events within a larger, meaningful narrative. This emotional reinforcement strengthened the group as a whole, making cooperation more stable and conflict less frequent. Without realizing it, early humans were building a psychological foundation that would support increasingly sophisticated spiritual frameworks. As these social patterns took deeper root, the bridge between ritual behavior and emerging spiritual systems grew stronger, setting the stage for the next transformation. The shift from instinctive expressions to more deliberate and structured forms of spirituality that would continue to shape human evolution. As spiritual ideas continued shaping the social fabric of early human groups, the shift from spontaneous rituals to more deliberate, structured practices began to unfold. This transformation did not occur suddenly. It emerged slowly through repetition, memory, and the increasing capacity of human minds to assign meaning to specific actions. What had once been instinctive responses to fear, awe, or uncertainty gradually evolved into intentional gestures carried out with purpose. These early humans were no longer merely reacting to the world. They were beginning to design ways of interacting with forces they believed existed beyond the visible. Imagine a group preparing for a hunt. In earlier times, a gesture toward the sky or a touch of the earth may have been accidental or instinctual, but over generations, these gestures began to repeat in consistent patterns. A raised hand before leaving, a stone placed near the fire, or a moment of shared silence gained significance. These actions became part of a collective memory. The more they occurred, the more the group believed they carried influence. As a result, rituals shifted from spontaneous expression to something organized, guided by the idea that the unseen responded to human behavior. With growing cognitive complexity, humans began to create rules around these rituals, even if those rules remained unwritten. Some actions were reserved for certain individuals. Others had to be performed at specific times or locations. The placement of objects, the timing of movements, and the sequencing of gestures all began to reflect intentionality. Even sound played a role. A repeated chant, Rhythmic tapping or coordinated movement became a way to unify intention within the group. Structure emerged not from hierarchy, but from the growing belief that order strengthened the connection with the invisible forces guiding their world. Sacred spaces also began to form. Instead of performing rituals anywhere, early humans returned to particular caves, clearings, or natural landmarks that held symbolic weight. These places became repositories of meaning, marked not by architecture, but by repetition. Over time, returning to these spaces reinforced the idea that some locations were closer to the spiritual realm than others. These early sacred sites became anchors for the group's identity, memory, and collective imagination. As rituals grew more organized, they also became more elaborate. A simple gesture evolved into a sequence. A single symbol turned into a set of markings. The emotional atmosphere of the ritual deepened, involving anticipation, reverence, and a sense of communal purpose. These early systems did not yet resemble religion, but they carried the essential components: shared belief, structured behavior, symbolic meaning, and a collective interpretation of the unseen. Through this gradual transformation, humanity stepped into a new stage of spiritual evolution. The seeds of belief were no longer scattered instincts. They were taking shape as coherent systems of meaning, preparing the ground for the emergence of fully developed spiritual traditions that would soon reshape every aspect of human life. As early rituals became increasingly structured, something profound began unfolding across generations. These small, deliberate behaviors formed the blueprint for everything that would later develop into spiritual systems, mythologies, and organized religions. What started as instinctive gestures evolved into patterns that carried shared meaning, and those patterns gradually transformed into frameworks that helped early humans navigate an unpredictable world. Over time, symbolic thought, emotional expression, and collective memory aligned in a way that allowed entire communities to build a worldview that extended far beyond their physical surroundings. This shift marked one of the most important cognitive transformations in human history. Imagine a lineage of groups passing these structured rituals from one generation to the next. A gesture repeated often enough became tradition. A symbol, used consistently enough, became identity. A place visited with reverence became sacred. As these practices accumulated, early humans began interpreting their entire existence through the lens of a spiritual order. They no longer saw events as isolated or disconnected. Instead, they viewed life as part of a larger tapestry shaped by forces they believed were constantly influencing their world. This perspective offered stability, purpose, and continuity, allowing them to navigate hardship with a sense of meaning that earlier hominids could never have imagined. The stories told around the fire evolved as well. Over generations, they grew richer, more complex, blending memory with imagination until they formed proto-mythologies capable of guiding behavior, reinforcing group identity, and explaining natural phenomena with increasing sophistication. These early narratives did not merely describe the world, they shaped it. They influenced decisions, bonded communities, and provided a foundation for moral reasoning long before written language existed. From these narrative seeds, future religions would eventually draw structure, symbolism, and a sense of transcendent purpose. What is remarkable is how these early developments prepared the human mind for the theological systems that would one day emerge across continents. The idea that unseen forces governed life, that certain behaviors could influence those forces, and that stories could reveal deeper truths laid the cognitive groundwork for belief systems that would eventually span civilizations. Every ritual performed, every symbol drawn, every story shared, carried humanity one step closer to the spiritual traditions that would define entire cultures. These first steps were subtle, but their impact shaped the destiny of our species. And now that we have walked through this long arc from instinctive reactions to the birth of spiritual structure, I want to hear from you. If you reach this point, leave a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me," so I know you were here until the end. If the journey through these ancient origins brought you new insights, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next chapters we explore together. Your support helps expand this kind of deep, long-form content. And if you felt connected to this story, a simple like goes a long way in keeping this research alive. Before you go, there is another video waiting that expands this exploration in a different direction. There is a link right beside this one that continues this journey, so click there and come with me as we uncover the next layer of humanity's spiritual evolution.